Now, installing and running Wireshark, we've alluded to a lot of things leading up to Module 3. We covered a lot of stuff as far as the websites itself and things where, hey, if you go to wireshark.org, here's the link to download it and install it. But I'm just going to generalize first before we really start getting into the content of the section. Downloading and installing Wireshark is actually very easy. It's something that if you have a web browser and a PC, it's very quick and easy to do. Understanding what you're installing is more importantly what we're going to cover. And do you have a machine that can handle running Wireshark is probably one of the most critical pieces of using Wireshark, because Wireshark, if left to just capture data, could crash if it runs out of resources. So really understanding the preparation is also a very important thing about installing and running Wireshark. The use of a proper machine, one that can use and install Wireshark. We'll talk about things like what happens to the NIC, what is promiscuous mode, what are some of the modules that are installed, like WinPCAP or libpcap. What do those things do? Why is it seen to be a subsection of the install? So we're not really going to run through an install of installing Wireshark, because we did that in Foundations, and again, it's pretty self-explanatory as far as running and installing any application. You download it. You save it to the desktop or a section of your system. You click the executable and you go. But we're going to talk more about the preparation for specific components you're installing and why those components are pretty relevant. Okay. So very briefly, the requirements of running Wireshark. You have to really understand that this tool itself does not take up a lot of space. When you open it and run it, it doesn't take up a lot of memory. It's not something that really needs a requirements list. What's important to understand is, what are you going to do with Wireshark to really understand what makes a compatible PC or laptop or system. Now, this is very easy to understand. If you're going to run gigantic captures, meaning you're going to run 1-2 hour captures, you're going to capture every file, you're not going to do a ring buffer, you're just going to keep the thing running and it's going to make these gigantic files, you're going to open up gigantic files, then you need a very overbloated system with a lot of memory and disk space. The way systems are sold today, they come with disk space that back in the days when I know myself started, and probably some of you started, if you got a big SIM chip to throw into your computer and it was very expensive and you had like 8 meg of RAM or 16 meg of RAM, it was huge. Now they have terabytes, and I don't think that running out of space or running out of memory is something that's really going to get you these days. But it can happen because you can run gigantic captures, and trying to open these captures can be timely. So for example, if you run a capture for 2 or 3 hours, no ring buffer, no segmented or sections of files, and it's just one file, it might take some time to open, and it may be very memory resident on the system in which you open it on, which harkens back to what we talked about in the last section, where you just don't want to necessarily run this on a production system, for example, a production database server, and start running an open-ended capture. So you're not tested specifically on the exam, as you could see from the syllabus on, and I think some of us have seen this back in the day of the very old exams back from the 90s maybe, where they would ask you, on some of these types of exams, how much memory is required, and they'd give you four sizes, and no, you're not going to see that. But what's important to know is that for production use, just use your head. Be logical about what it is that you're going to install this on, and theoretically what you're going to do when you run the capture. And again, as I showed you, since you can chop the file up, you can get around that stuff as well. The software you need currently is the latest version, 12.x. I had that up before when I showed you. I'll pull it up again. And the way to find that is basically here, 1.12.x, I say because .1, .2, I believe it's up to .2 now. These come out very frequently. Just remember that you can read the bug list or get on the newsletter like I had told you. They'll constantly keep you abreast of all of the changes. Very rarely do they actually break something, which makes you have to back rev. They're pretty good about development and releasing of code, but just be aware that when you go to download the newest version, which we'll show, it'll tell you specifically what systems you can install it on. So yes, you can install it on Apple. Yes, you can install it on Windows. There's many versions, and there is stable versions, which, as you can see, I'm running the most stable version, 1.12.1, and there's always a next version available. There's always the development releases, and again, that's solely up to you on how you want to run. But right now, specifically, just knowing that we're on the most current version, and if you were to install this right now, we'd put the same version right back on. This is the software that or the requirements you need to consider, because as you can see, you can install it on multiple systems. We'll show you a Linux version as well. Okay, so to prepare to install. So as we showed up on the Wireshark.org site, you can download Wireshark, select and prep the target. So when I say select and prep the target, what I'm talking about is the compatible PC or laptop or device that you're going to install Wireshark on. Again, unless you're running a very old computer or you're running a computer with very little space, we're not going to go into how to look at this for all different versions of operating system, but whether you're using Linux or Mac OS X or Windows, you should be able to pretty quickly look to see what your resource usage is on the system, if you have enough disk space, not just to install the footprint of the Wireshark tool, which is very small, but also to run and save capture files. And that also goes for memory as well. It's on 1.12.x current version. As I alluded to earlier too, there's a preview of the newer GUI here. Now, it's the same version, but it's different GUI. So for some of you that don't or may not know, and it's not very heavily tested or part of the immediately part of the syllabus, the GIMP toolkit, or GTK, was the basis for developing the GUI for Wireshark. So as they've been trying to move away from that and do something a little bit different, there's this newer version that's built on different types of technology. So that's really why this is different, and the GUI is dramatically different. But essentially, the versioning and the versioning we're using for the exam for this course is the current stable production version, 1.12.x. And WinPCAP. So there's not just WinPCAP, but there's also libpcap and airpcap. And what these things do is, this is the tool or the driver that works directly with your driver and underneath, or I should say, works directly underneath Wireshark. So The first thing we have to do is understand specifically what when